Greetings, denizens of the Empire. It's Jabara here. The Kingdom of Benin is among my favorite pre-colonial African kingdoms to discuss and to research. It is an empire with ancient origins and was known for its wealth, complex social, political, and economic structures, powerful army, and advanced engineering. From the very beginning of contact, the organization and artistic achievement of this West African civilization both shocked and surprised European spectators, but unfortunately, these striking attributes also made it into a target. The Kingdom of Benin, not to be confused with the modern-day country of Benin, which exists in an entirely different part of West Africa, was invaded by the British in what was dubbed the Punitive Expedition of 1897. The palace burned, looted, and the king exiled. Fortunately, prior to this tragic event, many descriptions of this fantastic city were documented in writing by the British themselves, as well as the Portuguese and Dutch visitors who arrived in the region as early as the 15th century. Many of these depictions were accompanied by artistic depictions of what was observed, and later, actual photos of the city were taken towards the end of this sovereign kingdom's life. In fact, the artisans of the Kingdom of Benin itself produced artistic depictions of the people and the palace in many forms, but most notably of brass-casted plaques that still exist in museums and private collections around the world to this day. Some of these artistic pieces date back to as early as the 13th century. From artistic depictions to actual photos from the earliest cameras, we will be looking at numerous images of this impressive West African civilization and discussing what is shown. Despite its name, the Kingdom of Benin has no relation to the modern-day country of Benin. Instead, it existed in what is now the modern-day country of Nigeria, centered around Edo State, which takes its name from the Edo people. The Edo people were the founders of the kingdom, which has its origins in the kingdom of Igodomigodo over 1,000 years ago. This first image is taken from 17th century Dutch writer Ulfert Dapper's Description of Africa, published in the year 1668. Here we can gaze upon a colorized drawing of the Oba Benin and its entourage of warriors, nobles, musicians, and even some tamed leopards. One thing to note about these wild felines is, unlike the case in European societies where the lion was looked upon as the king of the jungle, many of West Africa's forest kingdoms viewed the leopard as the king of the jungle instead. This is actually more accurate considering lions don't actually inhabit the forest, favoring open grasslands, while leopards readily inhabit forests. Considering the Kingdom of Benin's location in the African rainforest region, the taming of the leopard symbolized the king's power over both man and nature. The King of Kings. His ability to build a powerful kingdom out of the rainforest and the taming of the leopards symbolized not only his power to be the king of all human kings, but also the king of the beasts. In the background we can see what appears to be the king's royal estate, and further into the distance, the vast urban landscape of the imperial capital, which was known as Edo in pre-colonial times. Yes, you heard right, Edo. The capital city of this West African kingdom shared the same name as the royal capital city of Japan, but this was purely coincidence. However, just as Japan changed its capital city's name to Tokyo, the capital Benin's name also changed, and today it is known as Benin City. This imposing urban center was surrounded by massive city walls, which would later go down in history as the largest earthen structure ever constructed by mankind prior to the mechanical era, as evidenced by the 1974 edition of Guinness Book of World Records. You can also observe numerous palaces and towers poking out from the cityscape, which we will observe up close and in detail, as well as actual historical photos later on in this video. This next image is a print created in the year 1747 by another Dutch artist by the name of Johan Israel de Bry. It depicts a public execution in the streets of Benin. While this image lacks the detail of the previous one, we can still identify a few notable features that highlight the nature of the Kingdom of Benin's architecture. Firstly, it's very clear that the buildings are not made to scale, as they are quite small in comparison to the men and the horses in the streets. However, you can notice the strange rectangular openings in the rooftops, which are likely a crude representation of the courtyard-based compounds of the Kingdom of Benin, a style of dwelling common throughout all the forested regions of pre-colonial West Africa, which resembles the atrium and compluvium built by the classical Romans. We'll also notice the lack of windows of any kind on these buildings. This is because windows were indeed uncommon in the region, most structures having no windows or containing just one small hole for light. Most of the dwellings found in this area were designed to let in as little sunlight as possible, preserving the cool and comfortable indoor temperatures in the hot and tropical climate of West Africa, oftentimes relying on the natural cooler draft to flow in through the door while pushing the hot air out through a space between the top of the wall and the roof to create ambient airflow, an effect driven by the natural tendency of hot air to rise. These architectural traditions are a far cry from the primarily concrete structures with roasting metal rooftops found in modern Nigeria, which reach inhospitable temperatures, further exacerbated by the lack of air conditionings in most modern Nigerian residences. Here's another image by the same artist, similar to the previous one but in much more detail. If I had to guess, the bride never visited the city in person and was likely given incomplete details from travelers that described it to him, as the structures only loosely resembled those of Benin and appeared to be made of wood rather than earth. These next few images were created by the British in the year 1897, during the time that the Benin Kingdom was invaded in what was dubbed the Punitive Expedition of 1897, a violent annexation of Benin that came as a result of a squad of British men who were previously attacked and killed by Benin warriors 1 year prior, on their way to the capital city of Benin, when it was discovered that they maliciously intended to overthrow the king of Benin and replace him with a puppet ruler of their choosing, to enable the British to have influence and control of the trade in the region. They entered the kingdom impersonating a peaceful civilian ambassador party, but in reality, they were mercenaries in disguise, as was confirmed by the many arms concealed within their luggage. As we can tell, these next two images more or less portray the same scene as one another, only one appears to be done by ink or pencil, while the other one appears to be done in watercolor. The depiction seems to be a view from atop a cliff or some other very high point, overlooking the city of Benin. The courtyard-based dwellings that we discussed in the previous images are very apparent in this photo, in much more realistic proportions, as well as the interior network of walls that we briefly discussed earlier. These walls created clear boundaries between the main roads, streets, and homes within the city. Notably, this tradition of walls or boundaries between homes and buildings is still practiced throughout present-day Nigeria, albeit with modern materials like concrete and steel. During the aforementioned annexation of Benin by the British in the year 1897, photography had only just been invented just a few decades prior, so we have the bittersweet luxury of seeing actual photos of contemporary Benin shortly after its demise. By all accounts, many of the structures had clearly fallen into a state of disrepair and appeared to be in a disheveled condition, a mere shadow of their former glory that was described centuries earlier by early Portuguese and Dutch visitors. This was the consequence of several decades of a decline by disruptions in the economy brought upon by colonial interference. Additionally, some were heavily damaged, burned, or destroyed by British invaders themselves, like the Oba's Palace. Nevertheless, there are a fair amount of these photos consisting of the city streets, the walls throughout the city, and the palace ground, including the interior and exterior of the palace in all of its splendor. I know that ads can get pretty annoying and repetitive, but please hear me out. It's been quite a few years since I've been using Happy Hippo products, and I can confidently say that their traditional medicine has changed my life. They help me remain focused and energized, help with my anxiety, and put me in a generally good mood. I've recommended them to my friends and family with nothing but positive results, and that is why I recommend them to you and anyone else who can benefit from them. In fact, they even have a few types of African traditional medicine as well, like Akuama and Kana. You can get a 10% discount on your entire order site-wide if you use my promo code FN10 at checkout at happyhippo.com. In these pictures of the palace, a few things stand out to me. The first one being how relatively well kept and maintained it was comparatively, which offers a snapshot of the beauty and grandeur that was likely present throughout the greater part of the city during the time that the original Portuguese and Dutch visitors visited. In fact, Dapper mentioned how the walls were polished until they shined like a looking glass. The neighboring Ashanti people over in Ghana were documented applying similar practices to the walls and floors of their structures. Another thing that caught my eye is the roofing material. At first glance, it resembles the same metal roofing common throughout African cities today, but upon further investigation, it is very clear that this wasn't the case. In fact, the depictions of the palace created in bronze plaques by the Benin artisans themselves clearly show a shingled roof, but we'll discuss that more in the next section. Here we can observe the alcoves that run along the edges of the rooms. In one image, they're being used as a bench by these Benin nobles, or chiefs as they are often overly simplified to in Western writings. These men, however, would have held many different royal titles akin to the nobles, kings, lords, dukes, earls, and knights of medieval Europe. In another image, we can see several tiers of these alcoves in various parts of a room that clearly serve different purposes, from seating to pedestals for various pieces of decor. However, other sections are more intricate, with a purpose that is not immediately clear visually. As we've discussed before in a different video some time ago, these actually concealed a complex system of channels that linked a sunken impluvium in which rainwater was collected from the roof, where it then drained through a series of pipes and channels that actually controlled the climate of the structure, in much the same way that refrigerant redistributes heat away from building interiors in modern air conditioning units. Unfortunately, I tried without success to find the source for these last two photos anywhere online, but I assume that they were taken from the hard copy of the Nigerian Traditional Architecture Volume 2 book, as evidenced by the text at the bottom of the page. It's also evident that this is a relatively modern photo considering the corrugated metal rooftops shown in the structures. These images are depictions of the royal palace. However, they were created locally by the artisans of Benin themselves, immortalized in brass. The most notable feature to me is the shingles of the palace. While some depictions of the Palace of Benin appear to feature thatch roofing, most of them depict shingles. Most pre-colonial Nigerian structures used thatch as a roofing material, so it's easy to assume that the case would be the same for the Obos Palace in the Kingdom of Benin. However, it's important to consider the fact that the depictions of shingles on the palace are found not only in the artworks of the Benin artisans themselves, but also later European visitors as well as photos taken by the British invaders. One thing of note, however, is that in the actual photos taken by the British, the shingles appear to consist of a form of thin tree bark, as opposed to thick wooden shingles, as what is seen in the plaques and in present-day contemporary artworks. It is also possible that different materials could have been used at different times and in various parts of the palace, which was described to be vast, comparable in size to some entire European cities. In fact, Olfert Dapper, the artist who created the first artistic impressions that we discussed, described the palace complex as being as large as the Dutch city of Haarlem. So depending on the location and time period in question, these materials may have included bark, wood, thatch, and later on, iron, the latter of which dominates the rooftops of most Nigerian structures to the present day. If you look closely, you can see a serpentine figure running vertically up the roof, similar in appearance to the gigantic bronze snakes that run up the length of the massive turrets found throughout the royal compound. If you zoom in even more closely, you can even make out another serpentine pattern that runs horizontally along the trim of the roof. Here is another photo depicting the snake and the bird straddling one of these aforementioned turrets, which seems to be covered in either wooden or asphalt shingles, although I am unsure of the original source of this image or the age of the structure depicted. Here we have some images of the city gates, which consisted of 9 massive gates. Each one was controlled by a clan of hereditary title holders, and was also guarded by armed soldiers during the day from dawn till dusk, before they were shut and locked for the night, and reopened in the morning. Here are some images of the actual keys that were used to lock these massive gates during the night. The city itself was also illuminated at night by massive brass lamps, standing some 20 feet tall and 15 inches in diameter, fueled by palm oil. Here are some images of these massive lamps. Notably, having public street lighting of this nature was not yet the norm in Europe or most other parts of the world at the time, a testament to the organization and innovation of Benin, which according to early European visitors was an exceptionally safe city in comparison to London, brightly illuminated by the aforementioned lights and patrolled by a dedicated police force to keep its denizens safe. And here we can see some other miscellaneous photos taken by the British after the punitive expedition of 1897. And lastly, just some really cool modern depictions of Benin City that I've come across. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on notifications. For sources, check out my website, fromnothing.info. For links to products, Patreon, Discord, or anything else to support or become a part of the Empire from Nothing, click on my link tree down below. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and always remember, we don't come from nothing.